move along here. So good morning and welcome to ACEC New York's second entry in the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging, DEIB for short, our program series, which will focus on gender in the workplace. This impactful series started with a session titled A New Approach to DEI and B at our winter conference with keynote remarks from Dr. Jarek Conrad, followed by a panel discussion of race issues. This second program in the series promises to be equally compelling, addressing gender issues in the AEC space. The ACEC New York HR Committee does not shy away from discussing difficult topics, and we're developing our next session with the intent to cover sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression in the workplace. We want to express our gratitude to those on the HR Committee, our ACEC partners, and our panelists today, who are all devoted to creating places of inclusion and belonging. So thank you, and thank you for attending. During the presentation, we ask that all participants please keep their cameras off and their mics muted. All questions should be submitted via the chat, and they'll be answered during the designated Q&A period following this session. If you're having issues accessing the chat or for any technical difficulties, please email natasha@acecnewyork.org. Again, that's natasha@acecnewyork.org. And without further delay, I want to introduce our featured speaker. Christy Zweig Niehues has a long history of involvement with management consulting and the AEC industry. She has held a number of roles at Zweig Group, including writing and researching for the Zweig Letter and Civil plus Structural Engineer magazine. She currently is the firm's marketing director, as well as the leader of the marketing consulting division. So without further delay, please welcome Christy Zweig.
Hi, everybody. I'm so glad to be here today. Honored that I get to share with you some of the work that I have been doing over the past year and couple years, really, and hope that you find this interesting and fascinating. So about me, you heard a little bit about me. I've been an employee of Zweig Group for almost the past 10 years now. In addition to doing the marketing director role, I also am the director of research and our e-commerce. And what Zweig Group does is we have gathered data for going on almost 30 years now by sending out surveys, collecting that information back and analyzing it. And over the past 2 years now, we have really focused on our mission, which is to elevate the industry. And a big part of that has been a special program called Elevate Her. And this is our commitment to embrace, promote, and ensure equal opportunities for everybody in the AEC industry, regardless of their gender, race, age, sexual orientation, or ethnicity. And what we wanted to do with that was originally to serve as advisors and a hub of information so that we can bring people together. And we have a long history of gathering research and sharing our advice with others in the AEC industry. From that, it's also taken on a life of its own. So last year, for the first time, we assembled a group. We called it a cohort of totally diverse individuals. So these are people in all roles across different firm types, different firm sizes, all across the whole nation. And we brought them together originally, actually in person before COVID. And we said, we want to get all of you guys together so that you can brainstorm what you think are these big challenges that are presenting obstacles towards the industry being more diverse. And from that, they split into project teams and worked on a project over the course of the year in their individual teams. And we had, projects that range from everything from, like you'll see, I've got a card deck here, which is a card deck designed to foster communication and discussion in an organization about difficult topics, to another group focused on why are young girls not more interested in being engineers. So it went in lots of different directions. It was super fun. And now for 2021, we've done the same thing with a different group of individuals. And we've got some new projects that we just started. So some of that just provides the context to what I'm sharing today. Through some of those projects, we gathered some more data and also just kind of presented a framework for a lot of the topics that we've been focusing on.
Christy, could you share your video? It's kind of nice to have a face to go with the presentation.
Oh, I thought that it was sharing. Sorry, guys.
I didn't mean the presentation. I just meant your face.
I'm gonna have to. I thought that it was sharing the whole time. Sorry, guys. It is not giving me that option, unfortunately.
No worries. No worries.
Yeah, it says I can only share my video when I'm done with my screen share. Sorry about that. So what I'm going to share with you today is some research that Zweig Group has. How we've collected our research, it's mostly by voluntary participation by individuals in the industry and also firms. Some of that's from like an incentive program. So we send out surveys and we say, if you participate in this, you get a discount code so that you can buy one of our final reports. But we also gather data through our advisory services, through social media. We also run an awards program for the best firms to work for. That's a national program, and that spans architects, engineers, environmental consultants, really that whole AEC space. We do not have a lot of participation in that from contractors and construction. So I will tell you right now, our data is much more heavily skewed towards predominantly engineering firms and architecture firms there. From that award, all participating firms need to send out an employee survey to their employees. And so you'll see that I've got some data here that will say this is from our Best Firm to Work For program, which means that that's then a survey of over 13,000 individuals working in the industry. So that's a pretty big sample there. Okay, so we're going to kick this off with a question for you all. So everybody here who's attending, this is a live poll here. So I think there should be a link in the chat that you can click to respond, or you can also use your cell phone. So the way that this works is if you want to use your cell phone, you'll send a text message to 22333. And that's like the number you would text. So if you were texting me, pretend that's my number, but text the text CZWAG 430, and that will enter you in this program. Then you can respond to the questions. So then you can answer yes, or you can answer no. So our first question, just to get you guys started, is have you ever thought about leaving the engineering industry? All right, looks like we're kind of coming to a close here. So we'll come back to this question later with some data that we have from some of our survey respondents. One shocking statistic that we had when we started looking at why the industry is not more diverse is that we found that 100%, this was in 2008 when we first looked at the data, 100% of female principals in AEC firms, when we asked them, have you ever thought about leaving the industry, said, yes, I've thought about leaving. And the reasons behind that are what I want to investigate further and what I think that we'll discuss today. Okay, so one thing that's happened this year has been COVID, and that's changed everybody's working situation a lot. And I'm going to share some numbers about what that's done, especially in relation to diversity and recruitment and retention. And so if you guys don't mind, answer this. This poll is a little bit more difficult because we've got some multiple choice options there. And when my presentation is done too, we'll have all of these responses saved and those will be shared with everybody. Awesome. So looks like we've got almost the majority either in the office full time or wanting to return, with a quarter here working from home partially or fully and continuing that. Very interesting. We've just got one more question here. Do you think remote work options create opportunities for a more diverse industry? And this one here, you don't want to text yes or no. You actually have to text A or B. Sorry about that. I want to clarify on that one because I can't use the same answer options. So A is yes and B is no. This one seems like it's not syncing, so we'll come back to this later. Oh, we might be able to show it right now. There we go. Awesome. Well, I agree, and I think that the data also supports that. So very interesting here. All right. So one thing that we've noticed, and I think there's a lot of very industry-specific information that supports this, is we found that females enter the AEC industry, but they leave at a disproportionately higher rate. So right now, overall, when we look at our whole data set of all the architecture, engineering, environmental firms that we survey, we're looking at a ratio of basically it's 60%, it's 70% male and 30% female overall. So that's across all roles, all age ranges. When you break it down by age range, you can see that, we start off in that you're entering the industry, it's your first job out of college, you start working at an engineering firm, that 18 to 25-year-old age range. That's 11% of the industry, by the way. You've got that 37 to 61 split there. So it's actually, it's not 50-50, but it's not too far off. Then as you go up through the age ranges, you can see that there's a drop off. And that drop off really occurs between that 26 to 35 and that 36 to 45-year-old range. And from there, the industry becomes less and less female. Part of that we obviously know is due to opportunities that were simply not available, going back 50 years ago. Engineering wasn't seen as much of a viable career option for women. But also what we see is that people leave the industry and they don't come back. And I think there's quite a few reasons for that. Another important thing to take note of when you look at this is that that age range there of like 56 to 66. So that's typically when we think of people having the time and ability to mentor others. They've got a strong wealth of experience there in the industry. That's only 3.2% female. So that it's 24% female in that age bracket, but 3.2% of the whole industry falls into that 56 to 66-year-old age range and female. So there's obviously a lack of female mentors, and then 67 or older is less than 1%, is just less than 1%. So females over age 67, less than 1% of the industry. Pretty shocking. When we look at the same data by job title, you also can see what's important to note here is that non-technical roles are more heavily female than male. And I think that that can be important here. And there's certain industries, or certain sectors within the industry that tend to have different ratio of females to males. So construction is much less females than, say, architecture, as you can see. We also took this same breakdown by job title. So we talked a little bit about those technical versus non-technical roles. And again, some of this is also related to experience in those age ranges that we just talked about. So intern level, entry level, 32% female, then entry level's 30, project engineer 22, going on up to principal, which is only 7% female. And in fact, our data shows that almost 90% of principals in the engineering industry are white males. So it's obviously hard. It's hard to reach that role, and it's also hard to have a mentor or somebody in that role. Another thing that we look at is salary levels. So Zweig Group has gathered salary data for the past 30 years. And I think that it's also very important when looking at salary levels to keep in context years of experience, because that very often dictates salary. So I wanted to put this in here as well to show how some of these differences may or may not occur. So looking at president, there's a pretty big disparity there. We've got that's 170,000 versus 115,000, but both male and female presidents had an average of 30 years experience. Marketing director, there's kind of a similar disparity, a little bit less so. One thing that I thought was interesting there was that the male marketing directors had much more experience than female marketing directors. So it seems that they are just staying in that role for longer for whatever reason. That is also a similar phenomenon that we notice when you go all the way down to the bottom there and look at that admin assistant category. So that is one area where female admin assistants were making pretty significantly more money than their male counterparts. So you can see that that's $42,000 a year. That's just average annual base salary versus $33,000 a year. However, when you look at those years of experience, you can see that they have triple the number of years experience than their male counterparts, which is pretty surprising, really, because when you think about it, 15 years is kind of a long time to stay in that role. And unfortunately, what that somewhat tells me is that female admin assistants are in that role and they're not graduating out of that role into other roles. So starting at the top of the org chart, Zweig Group surveyed some principals, partners, and owners of AEC firms, and we found quite a few surprising differences between males and females in the role. The first one being that over half, 54% of male principals said that work had a positive effect on their personal life, but only 32% of female principals feel the same way. We also noticed disparity in shareholder distribution. So 42% of female principals took a shareholder distribution, and this may be voluntary, and 57% of male principals. Another interesting thing is like work patterns. 41% of male principals said that they work on the weekend, but only 21% of female principals said that they frequently work on weekend or holidays. However, they both worked the same median number of hours per week, which was 50. So it seems that somehow those female principals are jamming more hours in somewhere without working on the weekends or holidays. Always an important question, going back, like I talked about when we answered that first question there in the live poll. In 2017 and 2018, 100% of the female principals that we surveyed said that they think there's a problem with the lack of diversity in the industry. However, we've got some bright spots here, and I don't want this all to be negative. By this past year, that's dropped down to just 63% of female principals feeling that diversity is as much of an issue. And I don't know if that's because they are preoccupied with other issues like COVID, or if there is, more of a balancing that is occurring. So we also talked about that, that desire to leave the industry. 2018, 100% of female principals said they'd considered leaving it. Again, that's a bright spot. That's also dropped. There is a difference there. So you can see only 42% of male principals have considered leaving the industry. And I think when I looked at our numbers here from all of you, it looked like it was about 75% said they considered leaving the industry at some point. Another interesting thing is, you'd think that once you hit that principal, partner, or owner level, your career goals have been met, but really just under half of all female principals say their career goals have been met. And 21% say they have not yet been met, and only 8% of male principals feel the same way. So there's some kind of a lack of career fulfillment that's still occurring even at those upper levels. However, good thing, definitely it's still a recommended career, both across both genders there. So almost 90% say they still recommend working in the industry. So that's great. Moving down the org chart, we did a brief survey of project managers. And this is really important because this is right here where we see that drop off. So this is when we start seeing the percentage of females in the industry drop off when they move from that more entry-level career up into more of a management role. That's that kind of 7 to 10 plus years experience range. This is also the range where firms are hiring the most right now. So another survey we did showed that over half of all firms are right now looking for somebody with 7 to 10 years of experience. So what we did was we asked these project managers, what's your biggest fear? So they were coming, from a more technical role, going into this management role. And we said, what's your fear about this move and this transfer? And females said the majority, their number one concern was, I'm concerned about supervising staff. So they were concerned about how they were going to be able to manage people. Male principals said they were afraid of getting away from that design and technical work that they love. And they were also worried about meeting their budget and time goals. I thought it was a little bit interesting if you think about stereotypical gender roles that none of the female project managers, literally 0%, were worried about being able to meet their budget or time goals. So taking a look at just some overall policies and procedures, this kind of sets the stage for some things that we'll talk about. 24% of AEC firms have no parental leave. The median amount of paid leave, and this is parental leave, so this is both paternity and maternity leave, is just 3 weeks. Unpaid is 12 weeks. And then here are some options here for what firms most often use for this. I mentioned that best firm to work for survey earlier. So this right here is how employees in the industry, again, 13,000 employees, rate their satisfaction with their firm's parental leave policy. And you can see there's definitely some differences between the age ranges in terms of their level of satisfaction, 26 to 35. This isn't surprising. That's when people have kids. That's the people that are most concerned about it and obviously the most dissatisfied. There's also a difference between how satisfied females in the industry are and males. Okay, so here's where we get to the fun part. Back at the start of COVID, actually almost exactly 1 year ago, when we had probably the first few cases of COVID and we started to realize this was going to impact things in a really big way, we launched a survey specific to the AEC industry on the impacts of COVID on our industry and on the way that we work. And we have continued to keep this survey open over the past year, and we've also added some questions as we go on based on what's most relevant. And so one thing that we asked, this is going to be just this year only, really, since we've started to see a little bit of a turn in things, was, do you think the industry will go back to the way it was pre-COVID-19? And actually, my numbers on this are reversed. So it's actually 62% said no and 38% said yes. So that is wrong. It should actually be the majority said that they think things have changed. And we'll see that and the impacts that has on everything. So one of the biggest things you guys obviously know, we answered some questions about working remote. At one point in time, almost everybody was having to work remote. And you can see here, we asked firms how they've changed their policies. And the very vast majority of firms pretty quickly changed their policies to allow for almost anybody to work remote, or pretty much at least some percentage of their staff to work remote. And of those that don't have employees that are working remote, we found that by and large, the absolute biggest issue that prevents people from working would be this one here, which you can see. That's a workforce that routinely works on site at project locations. So that's people like surveyors, people that need to visit job sites. That's pretty much very hard to get around. And then the second biggest one was distractions at home. And that's definitely something that you'll see from the data that I'm about to share seems to disproportionately impact females. So this just shows the data here about, you can see there's a pretty steep rise, and then it's remained pretty consistent about when we asked firms what % of your workforce can effectively work remote. It stayed pretty steady there, median at 90%. And this is all across AEC. As of right now, the latest figures I have is that still 68% are working remote. So that's a little different than what we got from you all who answered that question earlier. So I had to go get some kind of global data for this to give some context as well. So FlexJobs did a survey of over 2,500 working parents with children under the age of 18 living at home. They found that since the pandemic started, almost half of working parents have had to change their employment situation by either voluntarily reducing their hours or quitting entirely. That is shocking. And of those that quit, 38% do not even plan on rejoining the workforce right now. When we look at those numbers and we think about the recruitment and retention issues that we have in the AEC industry, that's pretty devastating. So I asked that same question to people in the industry, and unfortunately, I found very similar numbers. 41% of firms report that they've had some percentage of their staff voluntarily reduce their hours. And that could be, just going from full to part-time due to COVID-19 related factors, such as pressures from at-home work, caretaking duties, having to care for children, having children being school at home, having to care for family members, and other pressures like that. 33%, 1/3 of firms said they've had at least one full-time individual quit or resign due to those same factors. So, knowing that recruitment and retention is such a challenge for the industry, and then particularly recruitment and retention of females, that's pretty devastating. And this research goes on to explain about how that seems to have disproportionately impacted females more than males. So 63% of working mothers said they're primarily responsible for childcare during the shutdown. And that was, started in last spring. That was the spring of 2020. Only 43% of working fathers reported the same thing. And 17% of working mothers quit their jobs during the pandemic, and only 10% of working fathers. So we do have a bright spot. So this does kind of come full circle. So I think that we're starting to see, I don't want to say a return to normal, because as we saw, it actually seems that we may not ever get back to quite what we were before. These new remote work options have also opened up an opportunity for the AEC industry. So what we asked firms was, have these changes that have occurred in your business allowed you to do things that you were not able to do before? And we found that, and I just launched this maybe 3 months ago, less than that. So, this is relatively new data, and we're going to continue to gather numbers on this. And I think we're going to see these go up. 8% of firms said that they're now hiring outside of their usual geographic area, and 10% said they're hiring candidates that were not previously considered because they needed those remote work options or flexible work options. And 30% are now doing both. That's really cool. So that tells me that we do, kind of have a light on the horizon here, especially as it pertains to diversity in the industry, especially gender diversity in the industry, because if we're seeing that females are preferring more flexible or remote work options, or also just in general may not have as many work options in their given geographic area and may not want to relocate, it's going to open up some new opportunities for them. So I think that this is pretty interesting. And again, we still right now, recruitment and retention is one of the #1 challenges that's still faced by the AEC industry. Even during the pandemic, it's still been an issue for people to find and hire, as well as retain the amazing people that they have. 56% report that they need these professionals with 7 to 10 years of experience right now. All right. Well, that is it for my data dump for all of you. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share it. And I look forward to the rest of this discussion.
Thank you, Christy. It's great information. There's lots and lots of data out there, but to have information that's specific to our industry is really, really helpful. So thank you. And now I would like to introduce the moderator for today's program. Darby Starnes leads a learning and development team for TriNet. Darby plays a lead role in change projects, managing the adoption, execution, and implementation of the company's customer-facing programs. These programs are designed to give TriNet clients the best practices and resources they need to aid in their navigation of the ever-changing HR landscape. Please welcome Darby Starnes.
Great. Thank you so much, Kathy. Thanks for having me here, and thanks everybody out there with ACE CNY. And thank you, Christy, for sharing that impactful data. It's, goodness, I'm still digesting it all. It certainly tells a story. There's no doubt about that. So thank you again for the research that you do and sharing that information. So let's get started by introducing our panelists today. So the first is Denise Berger. And Denise is the Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer of the U.S. East and Latin America region of AECOM. And Denise is a results-oriented leader with more than 30 years of executive experience in architecture, engineering, construction, and program management. And Denise joined AECOM last year as the Chief Operating Officer for the Northeast region. We also have Dr. Sissy Nikolaou, and Dr. Nikolaou serves as the Earthquake Engineering Group Leader for the Materials and Structural Systems Division at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. She has over 25 years of global consulting experience in buildings and infrastructure systems, with emphasis on performance-based design, soil structure interaction, seismic hazard analysis, liquefaction evaluation and mitigation, multi-hard risk assessment of critical facilities, and emergency and action preparedness planning for communities. Also with us today, we have Peggy Van Eepoel, and Peggy leads the Thornton Tomasetti, Washington, D.C. office, as well as oversees the protective design and security practice there. During her career, Peggy has been involved in the design and structural hardening of more than 200 buildings, including facilities of the U.S. Department of State, General Services Administration, Department of Defense and Veteran Administration, and her diverse portfolio also includes master plan facilities, office buildings, educational facilities, laboratories, military housing, courthouses, museums, and hospitals. It's unbelievable. So welcome to our panelists today. All right, so we're going to get started talking about the data and talking about the story that this data tells. And so we're going to get started first by asking our first panelist a question. So Peggy, I'll get started with you because you're the last person I introduced. So Christy shared, several data points that speak to the disproportionate impact of COVID on female counterparts. So what does the data say about the work-life balance? What kind of story does this tell?
Well, the work-life balance slides were certainly very interesting and something that I think everyone has been focusing on even more so in this past year, where the lines between our work life and our personal lives have been blurred. The first thing I'll start with is that I think our industry is challenging in general with work-life balance because it's very deadline driven. We are very client facing. There's construction demands. So I think it's very hard to kind of carve out a predictable 40-hour week. So that's a challenge as a baseline for everybody that's involved. So I think that this feeling of being very stretched and feeling that tension on our personal lives is something that both male and female feel, but that for females, oftentimes there are many more expectations, whether it's at home as a parent or as a partner or as a caregiver, or even in the community, and trying to balance all those things. I know for myself personally, as well as the women that I have on my staff, that it's a constant struggle. And it continues to get more complicated when you move up to management levels or senior leadership levels, where there are a lot of requirements of your time, both during the workday and in the evening. There may be evening events, there may be work travel, and trying to weave those with your personal commitments is definitely very challenging. And I think that work-life balance has a direct correlation to that loss of our female staff at the midpoint of their career after 10 years or so. 10 or 15 years, where the pressures can get really overwhelming, and you're making kind of cost-benefit decisions about how you want to live your life, and oftentimes it can be difficult to have a work life that's rewarding enough to compensate for those stresses. So I definitely see that data, playing out in front of my eyes, and I think that we as principals at firms have to take steps to counteract that. We have to be active.
Thank you so much, Peggy. I really appreciate that. It's interesting that you touched on that fact that the work life has to be rewarding enough to support that, and what a very interesting point there. Thank you. So Sissy, I'd love to bring you into that conversation. On that note, we saw with the slide with flex jobs that it indicated that there was a 33% increase in turnover, whether voluntarily or resigning or quitting, but that turnover really impacted women in the workplace. So what do you think that's telling us?
Yes, what I think this is telling us is that the conversation has not been shifted yet, and there is a tremendous need to reframe the conversation about how to include women, which by default are the caregivers, and they have been most impacted by COVID. And as life changes, you start reevaluating, where you are in your career and whether it's worth doing that. So unless if we change the conversation from a mandate of having women and getting contracts that relate to the percentage of women or other categories of differences, to making that really what it is. It's a competitive advantage for these firms to have more women or other differences, whether it's race, whether it's religion, whether it's background, whatever that is, because we are problem solvers. And the more diversity you have in the workforce, the more of different solutions you are going to find in problems. So unless if we have these discussions, and events like these help a lot to steer the conversation. But frankly, Darby, I looked and I cannot tell for everybody attending if they're male or female, but they're primarily female. And I think in addition to the female colleagues, we need to have as many male owners of companies in this conversation. And another very interesting fact, before I close this part of the conversation, is that this huge gap of the 7 to 10 years of experience that all owners are looking to hire. If you look at your graduation from college with, say, a master's degree, this is more or less the time that you would be a young mother. And this is where you lose a lot of the bright women that could continue and be very productive. So these are food for thought, I guess, and I know we're going to talk more. Thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And gosh, you said so many great things, and one that really stuck out to me is making sure that we're embracing the fact that we're problem solvers, that increasing diversity in the workplace is part of being creative and innovative and coming together to solve problems, and that we need to create that space to steer these conversations. So thank you so much, Sissy, so much. So I'd love to bring Denise into this part of the conversation here, because, when we look, just as you were talking about the 7 to 10, years of experience gap, we also see that there's a disparity when looking at the gender distribution by title. So Denise, I'd love to ask you to, add on here, what kind of opportunity does that present to the AEC industry?
Well, it's an opportunity. It's also a challenge, right? When you look at this slide, you're looking at the entry level coming in at 30% female, right? And then when you go to project engineer, it goes down to 22%, project manager 16%, and look at the male counterparts. It's exactly what Sissy and Christy was talking about. Those are the 7 to 10 year folks, right? A lot of times they get disillusioned. They're probably not on the premier type jobs. They start questioning, whether this is the role that they want to continue going forward with. They're looking to maybe, we talk about childcare, they want to start families, and or they have elder care that falls on them too. Where do they want to be? And it's tough. And I'll just give you an example. So for me, I had a lot of, and Sissy talked about men, I had a lot of male champions and mentors who really promoted me, including my board of people who I surrounded myself with, right? That we all do at different times in our careers or in life. And one of my, let's say, chairman of the board for me was my husband. And every time and he was also an architect. So every time I wanted to just say, I'm stopping work, I can't do this anymore, he would like, what are you going to do home? And we were fortunate to have someone help us with childcare, but it was hard, class parent meetings, wanting to have dual roles, be in the workforce and be an active mom. So I, at the time, was working for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, and I decided to take a part-time agreement where I was working 3 days a week and doing a full, even though I was working 3 days a week, my managers were saying, you're working more than your male counterparts full time. But for me, it was the ability to know that I had that flex time, that I could be home with my kids. And, even though I was working full time and I wasn't giving, even when the sexy projects came up, I raised my hand. I'm like, I'll take it. I'll take that additional project to get noticed and to be, just to, be on those projects to get some fulfillment and to be developed. My career plateaued. It plateaued for several years, whether that was right or wrong, it did. But in my mind, it was worth it because I got to be with my kids. And that was my personal, goal. When I got to work for the chief engineer at the time, right after 9/11, I said to him, hey, I'm working 3 days a week. And he said to me, Denise, you're working so hard, come back full time. You have flexibility. And he was my major champion. And I guess what I'm saying is that it can be done. It's hard, but you have to surround yourself with people who prop you up, who support you. And I always remember that. And unfortunately, Christy also said there's 3.2% of, I guess, women who are the older women. I guess I would come into that category. We're not there enough to maybe support the younger women as we come in. So my request to everybody on this call is to please mentor and champion. If I'm on the elevator, I say to all my friends who women, come on, let's go to the top together. So let's help support one another. And that's what I have. Thank you.
No, thank you, Denise. And you've got some hearts, you've got some claps going on. So we've got lots of response to
I was
all
wondering
of
if those things were popping up.
Yeah, those are people loving your comments there, and the clapping. And I think it's for everybody. So thank you so much for doing that, because that shows us, that we're telling the story. And I'd love to, so Peggy, Denise was talking about, what that opportunity looks, but also that's a challenge. And you can see on this slide, what do you think about the age and gender distribution and what it says about the industry trends?
Well, I'll start with, I absolutely agree with Denise in terms of how important the support and the championing of women is. Mm-hmm. One thing I've noticed in conversations and in my own experience is that it can be very lonely as you're progressing in your career. And as I said earlier, it's hard. The career is hard for everybody involved, and there's pressures. And so I think that having those people to both bolster you and advocate for you, to help you through the difficult times that you're definitely going to encounter, makes a difference. And so trying to, and whether it's male or female colleagues or partners doing that for you, I think it's a really important thing to consider. I think that it's not just giving people opportunities, women opportunities, but is also supporting them through those opportunities and giving them the tools that they need to succeed there. In terms of the age and the gender data, so looking at trying to be very intentional about that age group where we start seeing that drop, the 36 to 45 years. That's something that at our firm, we've developed a program called Masterminds for staff that has about 10 years of experience, understanding that this is a pivotal time in women's careers, that they are emerging as future managers and leaders in the company. So it's been really interesting because it brings together this group of women to educate them, to provide that support group, and then to help them sharpen their business and their personal skills. So they've been doing all of those things, but I think the part of it that has been the most incredible to me is seeing how it really has created an internal network for these women across the firm. And that's both for helping them with technical issues, helping them when they're dealing with personnel issues, helping them gain skills with financials. I mean, you had that slide earlier about what are the things that worry people that are emerging into management roles. So giving them that network inside the firm, because that's something that sometimes when we have so few women in a certain office, they might need to reach out to someone in another office or in a different group that they may not necessarily have that connection, through their project work. So that's been something that we've tried to do kind of surgically at that age group. And what we're looking at now is actually continuing that for those women who are graduating from that class of staff into more senior leadership and trying to give those women the coaching that they need to be successful in those roles.
And Peggy, thank you for that. So, it's great to hear about what you've done as an organization with that program and identifying those emerging leaders and really, and as you just used the word surgically, being precisional about that. But let me ask you, what about organizations who don't have a program? How would you recommend someone start really building that supportive network?
I think that having a formal program is not necessarily a requirement. I think it is more about the culture and this concept that really everyone can be advocates for each other, as well as looking very intentionally to be a mentor or a coach for women in your group. So that's something that I think, again, it doesn't need a program. It's more about understanding that we need to take action and to be accountable for elevating our women in our firm. And I think that that's something that we are trying to do at our firm as well, trying to help everyone understand that everyone is accountable for making this change in the company. Because the one program, I think, is effective in affecting this group of women, but that attitude towards everyone taking part in this evolution of the company is something that we're trying to imbue into all of our staff. Because it really does, it goes from the beginning of your career all the way through the end, and making sure we're paying attention to that. And I would expand it even more. It's not just the woman diversity, but overall diversity, and making sure people just have that awareness throughout their career, whether it's non-technical or technical staff, has been something that, again, we're trying to focus on as a firm, but I think is applicable to any firm, regardless of how much structure they put to it.
And thank you so much for that, Peggy. And Sissy and Denise, I'd also like to pose that question to you because it's so powerful, whether it's a mentor group, but really being intentional about creating that space for that to advocate, to take action, to be accountable. So, Sissy, what does that look like in your organization and in your experience?
Yes, so my experience has been primarily in this industry, in the consulting industry. I just moved to the federal government a couple of months ago. So
Sissy, I think it accidentally placed you on mute. I think there it goes.
okay.
Yeah.
So I said that I could probably speak about experiences on both, although the engineering experience is the most long, and I think things take a very long time to change, and it is the responsibility of anybody who has been mentored by somebody to give back. And I think organically this is also women's nature, I think, is more prone to that. So I think it takes only one person to be able to have as your go-to person, where you feel safe to talk about experiences and seek advice. And I know this is very hard to do, because it took me many years to be able to feel comfortable, because you are in a way, and I'm talking about, also the older times, in a way you're being put down, or you are being put in a position where it's okay if you go up to there, but don't think of going more than that. And it's not explicitly said, although things that have been explicitly said to others and some to myself is that it's okay to have one kid, but two, now it's the end of your career, and things like that, right? And if you talk to the women across the board, they will say, oh, I heard the same. And so it is very good to have rules, and it's very good to have internal groups, but there is a risk of creating little gangs, I don't know how to say it better, where let's gang up against all the white American males, and that's why I said from the beginning, we need everybody in the room in these difficult conversations, because many times, unless if these men have women of the same age in the same industry, many times they have not heard these things. It has not crossed their minds that these things are happening. So it's something in our unconscious that has to do with that, where we put people in categories, or we don't understand the difficulties that women are going through. And it's hard for us to speak about it. And if we only are in a safe room with all of us the same, we kind of replicate the problem, but we feel good, and this conversation should be happening. But it's a very, very tough industry to accept women. And usually we're not just women, we are also other things. We are, coming with an accent like me, or we could be in some other category. And all of this, what we have learned from COVID, the thing that we are all in this together, it's true. Because at the end of the day, globally, what we have seen is that we all care at the end of the day about the same things. We care about safety, about happiness, and to have whatever balance means for each one of us. So let's try to work with stakeholders, with governance, and this is where organizations like ACEC helps a lot, is to promote a culture and a structured environment that is going to shift things, and it takes time.
Thank you so much. And both Peggy and Sissy, you both have got lots of applause and lots of hearts going, and And you said so many impactful things, both of you. And Sissy, one of the things that you just said was, that we've learned from COVID that we all care, but at the same time, this is a cultivation of the culture. It takes a lot of time to change, but you have to have those conversations to create the awareness and to understand what it looks like to move forward. So it's very impactful. And Denise, I'd love to hear some more thoughts from you on that. And you're muted, sorry. Yep.
I know. I knew I was going to do that. So let me just step back for a second. So about 10 years ago, I was asked to speak at a ASCE conference, and I'm an architect. So and this is 10 years ago, it wasn't even ED&I because equity wasn't on the campaign. It was more diversity and inclusion. And I went to the discussion, spoke on the panel, and realized how many men were in the audience. And I was like flawed. I was like, wow. And usually sometimes I didn't think how many people were going to show up for it, to be quite honest. At that time, we could be all together. Over 250 people showed up. And I was like, wow, this is a really interesting topic. I went back to Port Authority's HR director and spoke to some other folks and realized that this is something that was really important, obviously. And they asked me, hey, Denise, what do you think about championing an ERG, Employee Resource Group, and creating a women's council? And I was like, wow, why not, right? So we launched it on International Women's Day. And we had panel speakers like we're doing right now and a keynote. In 2 hours, it sold out. 250 people wanted to attend, and it was internal to the Port Authority. And we just went, and it was organic, and it grew, and I got the executive director involved, and then a new executive director came in who was a champion for ED&I. And right now, they look at how resumes come in to make sure that they are inclusive, and how the selection committees are, and making sure there's mentors and champions. So now I'm at AECOM, and AECOM, 65,000 people, huge global company. I'm the Chief of Strategy and Innovation Officer for the whole East region in Latin America. So I'm on the global committee, was asked to join the global committee for ED&I, which I was so happy to do that. Our president is a woman, Lara Poloni. Our CEO is Troy Rudd, who and everyone's really involved, and they stood up this program from top to bottom, looking at ED&I. They have a steering group globally from around the world of maybe 10 to 15 people, looking at how do you measure ED&I success? How do you look at equity through infrastructure, sharing regional and global best practices, developing pathways for diverse leadership, creating educational programs. So it's terrific that we're doing all this, and then bringing it down to the Americas and bringing it down to the region and have ED&I. And how do you work with that in terms of champions and mentors? And two things that I want to talk about just real briefly is we did a reverse mentoring. So everybody on the leadership, for instance, even Troy, he has a younger person, gender, and a younger person who he mentors, reverse mentoring, so he gets to see what's going on. And in our Australia office, we have, it's the third year of a formal sponsorship program where we pair senior female leaders with members of emerging leaders. So they network, they have strategic alliances, career opportunities to, overcome biases and systematic barriers for women's. So it's kind of learning. We have all these global, I said global, so we have all these best practices embedded globally, but now how do we share those best practices through AECOM globally, and how do we get that out to the community? So that's some of the things that we're working on, and I'm really excited about it, as you could tell.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, it's very exciting. I mean, that's a lot, and goodness gracious, it's great to hear, for those on the call who may not be familiar with an ERG, the Employee Resource Group is often a wonderful way to help increase awareness about certain topics, women and other diverse categories as well. And it really creates an intentional, safe space for people to come together. And it's an employee-led group, so it helps people to have that psychological safety, to come together, have that awareness, and then build upon that. You know, and I loved hearing you say about the Women's Council, but how, of course, you know, I think we're all in agreement here that this all has to start with the top down for leadership. And it's wonderful to hear that, you know, your president, your CEO are behind this, because, you know, having those key drivers and having that permeate your entire organization, it's great to hear that success and know that that is also a roadmap that others can also look at to implement in their organization.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. So, you know, with that, we also had someone else ask a question. So I'm going to go back a little bit to the age question about where does age fit in to this picture for us as women?
What does that mean by age? What does that mean? Could you just add a little more color to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to go back to the slide too, but so someone said, where does age fit into DE&I? So I just wanted to make sure that we went back to the slide and maybe talked about this a little bit more.
Does that mean someone, I guess, I just, so I know that we had engineers come in, and I'll give you a story. Engineers was riding the PATH train to get off. They had to get off the train to get to the work location, right? Because they were doing at a substation. And when they asked a gentleman, the transit person, to let them off, he said to her, "Where's her father? Is she riding the train alone?" And she's like, "No, I'm one of the engineers and you have to let me off at this spot." So I'm not sure if that, because if that's what they're talking about in terms of age, sometimes younger females maybe don't get the credibility because they're looked at, they're young, what do they know? Or I'm just trying to frame what the—
Yeah, absolutely. And the person did type in clarification, but I love that you went there with the younger, but yeah, so the question was stated really for women over 50.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I just know when I was starting out in my career, I got a lot of that also. And I had to be patient with, and at the time, it was a very long time ago. So it was all male, the counterparts and peers that I was working with. So I tried to be as respectful as I can. For women, for me, so I would fall in that older category. I don't really have any concerns or maybe issues. I just try to be respectful to my male counterparts, not call them out too much, but make sure I always have a seat at the table and make sure that I brought in a lot of women into the Port Authority who report to me, and I'm doing the same thing in some respects at AECOM, and I always make sure that they have a seat at the table, and that's really on me to make sure that they're at the right meetings, that they're seen. I help them in respect. So if I'm standing up some some pillars right now, including ESG and digital transformation and marketing and branding, and you know, as I bring new people in, male or female, I always want to make sure that I'm there for them to because it's a big organization, to introduce them to the people that they need to know to make sure that they could thrive. And that's on me to do that.
Thank you so much for that. And I love that you were talking about, you know, that's also your commitment to making sure that, you know, your counterparts are there at the right meetings, and that you've taken on that as you move forward. And Peggy, you know, I know you spoke about this a little bit about the age and gender distribution, but, you know, how would we get started having inviting the conversation of women over 50 to the diversity conversation and the culture we're trying to cultivate?
Well, the women over 50, quite honestly, when I look at the women over 50 that I've interacted with in the AEC industry, for that, it's really a pipeline issue, right? I don't know that we're going to drastically change the amount of women over 50 unless we work on the pipeline to get there, right? And set women up so that they survive the 20 years. So I think that, you know, building up so that we have a strong pipeline and group of women at the age of 50 that are in roles where they can be role models and influencers at the firm is what we need to do. One thing I wanted to comment on is that we've all talked about advocacy, and I want to give a very specific example about how I think that impacts who we have in the 40s and 50s at the firm. So for myself, I know that advocacy and building of confidence was significantly impacted by males who would, when I was a very young engineer, say, you need to listen to Peggy, you know, she has something to say. Because as a young engineer in general, I think that people might dismiss you. As a young woman engineer, even more so. And that has happened less and less in my career, fortunately now. You know, as an engineer from the age of, let's say, 25 to 35, which is that point at which after people would leave, there's, I think, a challenging time where it's hard to be heard. It's hard to be looked at as someone who knows what you're talking about. So that advocacy by someone to say, she knows what she's talking about, she's the one to listen to, and building that trust from your colleagues and clients was really helpful to me. And I think that it helped me both in being heard and being looked at as an expert, but also in building my confidence to say, I know what I'm talking about, they believe in me, you know. And so I think by doing that, again, each of us is responsible for doing that. And it can be small gestures, you know, at a meeting to say, hey, I don't know the answer, you know, this woman is the one who did the work, and listen to her. Or giving someone an opportunity to say, I'm not going to do the presentation. You did the work, you should present this. I think sets us up for women who, by the time they are 50 years old, they have that confidence, they have that impact, people are listening to them, and that's people, men or women. Because I think oftentimes we're just speaking to ourselves, right? And we don't want women in our firms to be looked at as leaders of women. We want them to be looked at as leaders of the company, regardless of what gender you are and regardless of what age you are.
Peggy, thank you. You have lots of hearts and lots of claps going, that's for sure. And that was so powerful. Thank you very much. And that I can't say the word all of a sudden, advocacy, there we go, I got it out, is so important. And thank you for really painting that picture and creating a vision. Thank you for that. So, you know, Sissy, I'd like to open it up to you, if, you know, in that part of that conversation about, you know, the advocacy and setting people up for success. How does that look for you?
Again, I think mentorship is key in this, and I think also creating events or interactions with other women that, at least from my personal experience and now looking also at younger versions of me, we kind of idolize very successful women as these super women that you know, made it there. And if you talk to them, you realize that they have gone through what you have gone through and even worse. And if we do that, it's easier for younger women to identify with them instead of putting them in a pedestal as the ones who somehow made it, you know. And I have seen that. I have been mentored, you know, very, very early on, being asked to go for lunch or for dinner with other women. And actually one of them was Anya Brazil, who started the women's group in Thornton Tomasetti. And, you know, she was a goddess of structural engineering. Like, why would she talk to me, right? And, you know, you sit down, you feel included, and that changes everything. It really does. And by no means do I diminish the power of your technical competency. And I know that all of us feel that we have to be better than any equivalent other male or other category, but owning your success or owning what you know as an expert is not bragging. What I have seen is that women are so shy to claim their space in something that they know better than anybody else. That is very important, and it leads also to a lot of the disparity that we see in the percentages of principals, like that are very low, as we saw in the presentation. It is sometimes that we don't want to ask. We want to be asked to be given something because we are doing such a great job. And sometimes you have to ask. There is nothing wrong with asking. The worst that could happen is to hear a no, right? So this is the little things that I try to discuss with women, but also other different individuals that really suffer a lot in an industry that is so male dominated, like the LGBTQ community. That it is okay to be better than anybody else in your field. You need to own it, and you need to share it with others, and ask for help in the things that you don't. It's like common sense in the advocacy domain. Simple steps.
Thank you for that. And the inclusion and belonging is so important, and to hear you use those words and about sometimes feeling that you have to be better than your counterpart, and making sure that you're claiming your space. That doesn't mean that you have to that you're not included or belonging, but it does mean that you recognize that success. And thank you for walking us through that, because I think that certainly speaks to the data showing that 7% of women are in principal roles versus 91% of men. Anything else you want to share on that?
Yeah, I think that we have to realize that this is a problem across the board. I think the numbers for CEOs in America are less than 5%. So it goes back to first of all, not being to retain earlier on, and that by default is not going to get you to that category. And then it is the reluctancy. I think I have been personally told that I'm not like the other guys. Like, of course, I'm not like the other. I'm not a guy. So the stereotype that we have, what I have seen and I have felt in my gut, is that when you are able to get your message through in a project, in a delivery, in a proposal, in a conference presentation, whatever that is, in a panel, then people start hearing what you're saying and stop looking at the how you look like, which could contain perceptions that you have for that person. So I have been told a couple of times that, I went to get my tag for a conference, and it's like, oh, that's not you. You're not the keynote. You don't look like a keynote. And I was like, okay, how should I look like? Like, I don't know. Like, listen to what I am saying, So this important 7 to 10 years of experience that we lose. And the same thing happens in academia for engineering. But if you look at the law profession, a lot of different, big professions in different industries, it is a problem across the board. So what happens is that this is the time that many of us have families. And then it becomes so difficult, especially if you don't have other family around to help with caregiving. it is so difficult and it's such hard choices to make. So I hope that the successful experiment of working from home is going to help that. But because before it was kind of an anathema, it was kind of, if you don't show up at 8:30, then you don't lead by example, which is like the stupidest thing. Some of us, our brain doesn't work at 8:30 a.m., me being included. So the question is, can I do the job right? The data that was shown earlier are very interesting to me, because they demonstrate that before you go into that highest category or in a senior PM category, your biggest fear is you cannot manage and you cannot supervise people and you cannot deliver successfully and on time. And then this number dropped, I think, to 0 into what the truth was, how women perceived it once they were there. So we are by nature, and we have to embrace our nature as women, we are multitaskers, and we are fine when we are taking something upon ourselves. So these are very, very important points, and maybe something good will come out of COVID into having owners of companies understand that we are all big boys and girls and we do our job, whether it's from home or it's in the office. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. And gosh, so many powerful things that you have all said. And we only have 10 minutes left, so it just flew by. So I want to make sure, though, we address another question that came in before we wrap it up. So Denise, the question is as we look at the data on base salary and experience by gender, what does this say about potential equity opportunities in the industry?
It says that we really need, our companies that we work for really need to make a commitment to looking at where we want to, and to bring, it's hard. I'm going to be, as a manager, it's hard when a woman comes in, let's say, making $100,000 when, or has been in at $100,000 when her male counterparts or even other counterparts are making $160,000 or $150,000. It's hard to move the needle forward. And sometimes you have to look, and maybe leave to get that jump. But I think that, the right answer is that we should be making sure when we bring people on or look at the comparable market ranges that we bring people up to an equitable level with their peers. Now, unfortunately, is this happening? In many cases, obviously it's not, because the numbers are showing that it's not happening. But I believe as a leader in my organization and as folks on the call, I have a responsibility to make sure that I do that.
Thank you for that. Thank you so much. So Peggy, let's bring it home. What is one piece of guidance that you would want to give before we wrap it up?
So there's so many points I could make, but I think one that I want to circle back to is what we were talking about with Sissy with regards to the 7% of the principals being women. I think that this should be a focus area for our firms, because the women who are principals are the ones who are going to impact the future of the firm, right? So I've seen it in very small and very significant ways, the way that my presence in conversations changes the direction of the conversation. And it's not because of intentional disregard of the unique needs of women by my male counterparts. It's just that I think differently. My worldview is different, and my perspectives are different, whether it's because I'm a woman or other factors. So I think that having more women and improving those numbers significantly will make a difference in our firms, in the face of our firms. We'll have policies and programs and just a culture that is more beneficial to women and can bring women forward in the companies. So I think that's something that, granted, we talked a lot about, how do we fix that pipeline, but I think really trying to make a shift in that number of principals and making it a rewarding opportunity for women as well, I think is really important. So I challenge our firms to try to do that and to shift the needle there, because I think it will change the future of the AEC industry.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all so much. This has been such a wonderful conversation, and I know that everybody has been positively impacted by this conversation and what you've shared today. So with that, thank you again to Christy for sharing this incredible data to start this conversation and bring it home. And with that, I'd like to pass it back over to Kathy. Kathy?
Yes, thank you, everyone. That was really impactful for me personally. Does anybody else on the call have questions? We can keep the chat moving. I just have one other note to comment is as leaders and as we talk to our leaders in our organizations to look at and think about when and where important decisions are being made. The old dynamic of important decisions being made out on the golf course, for example, or after dinner with drinks that don't quite fit into a multitasking schedule. So I think we need to pay attention to some of those things, and we can change them pretty quickly so that we can be there and involved at those meetings and at the table. Anyone else from we've got some thank yous coming in. It was a great conversation. Anyone else here? Thank you, thank you. Do any of your company have women-focused mentoring? We got a question there. We have time for one more question.
We do. In AECOM, we do. I think I spoke about it. We have a formal sponsorship program for senior female leaders paired with members of emerging female leaders. Where we network and provide strategic alliances and career opportunities. Helps increasing up opportunities for career progression at senior levels, and also strengthens engagement and retention of our female employees is what we've been seeing. Great.
More thank yous coming in. So much appreciation to all of you for sharing personal stories as well as great information that we can all take back with us. That's one of the things that's so important about this is that I think there's something that each of us can take back with us that's doable in our own organizations, whether it's a small or large organization. So with that, again, more thank yous. It's thank you, inspiring, informative, getting great comments from everyone. And I think if Gina or Natasha, I know that we've commented that this information will be, it's been recorded and the presentation will be shared with folks after the fact. But with that, I guess we can call it a day. Thank you very much and keep up the inspiring good work.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. All right.